In this video, we're going to take a look at some strategies for balancing render time with the amount of noise that you find in the image. And for this video, I'm using the Space Cantina Interior 01.ma scene. Let's take a look at the render settings. And in this particular scene, I'm using the direct light kernel for rendering. So I'm going to reduce the max samples. Let's set it down to, let's say 800 just for now. The filter size will add a little bit of a blurring that can help reduce the noise. If you increase this too much though, you run the risk of making the image soft. So you want to use that with some caution. Let's go down to the direct light settings. And I just want to focus on a few settings in here. One is the irradiance mode, which you can turn on down here. And this restricts the renderer just to a single bounce of light and removes the influence of bump. So it's a great way to kind of see the noise in the scene and allow you to tune the settings so you can kind of quickly reduce that noise. So it makes the noisy areas, the problem areas, a bit more obvious without having to deal with things like reflections and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a diagnostic mode. There's also a render pass available that does the same thing. If you go to the render settings, I'll create a new passes node, and you can see under beauty passes down here, there's an irradiance mode that you can turn on. So either way, you kind of does the same thing. Let's go back to the kernel settings. The path termination power setting can help you to speed up the render or reduce render time. But raising this will reduce render time, but could lead to more noise in darker areas. So this is another one that could be used to balance the scene, depending on what's going on with the lighting in the scene. The coherent ratio can reduce the amount of noise in the scene, but at the risk of introducing some blotchy areas. And this is one that you kind of want to avoid using if you're going to be rendering an animation, because those blotchy parts can shift from one frame to the next, and that's not going to look good in an animation. But for still frames, it might help you to reduce some of the noise. You just want to be careful and pay attention to certain areas that might start to get blotchy. I think over here we can start to see some of that blotchiness coming in. The static noise setting just means that any noise patterns that are on the image, like these areas, are going to remain in the same place from one frame to the next if you're rendering an animation. It can reduce render times, but it also, depending on how much noise is in your scene, it might look a little bit weird if you're doing an animation. So that's one you want to kind of use with caution. Increasing parallel samples means that the scene will take more memory to render, but this can reduce render times. You want to balance this based on how many GPUs you have devoted to rendering the scene. If you do have a lot of VRAM to spare, then you can increase this option, and that might reduce the render time. So if you continue to adjust the settings in the kernel, but you're still getting a fair amount of noise that's visible in irradiance mode, another thing you can try is adjusting the samples on the lights in the scene. And we'll take a look at that in another video later on.